Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your attention. I really like to interrupt you. Actually, why? Why? Because I can introduce you now to our special guest tonight, Suzanne Heywood, Baroness Heywood of Whitehall, a renowned British business leader and author. She's, amongst others, chair of CNH Industrial and the Iveco Group. She is also member of the board of directors of The Economist and Christian Louboutin. She wrote bestsellers like What Does Jeremy Think or Wave Walker Breaking Free. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Suzanne Heywood. Good evening, so good to have you here, Suzanne.
See you.
Which chair?
Don't mind.
Okay, so
Fantastic.
I just drunk here.
Okay.
So, so don't go.
Don't lean back, otherwise it could go horribly wrong.
Don't move.
Okay.
Although our Secretary of State asked the people to move, we do not. We do not. It's too dangerous. We are so delighted to have you here, Suzanne. We invited you not only because you are an outstanding businesswoman and comment on the state of Europe or leadership regularly, but also because your biography, your life, is fascinating, it's shocking, and it's admirable at the same time. And a big part of your biography you put in that book, right?
Yes.
Wave Walker Breaking Free. And that's what we are going to talk about, if you agree. So, when we start with your story, when you were 7 years old, your parents decided to leave the familiar life in England behind and took you and your younger brother on a sailing ship to retrace Captain James Cook's third voyage. Now, when I heard that, I thought, yeah, maybe that was a nice adventure, you know, on a nice luxury sailing boat, dolphins in the sea. But when I continued to read the book, it gave me some hard feelings, actually. Can you share the experience you made on that boat?
I can. Well, first of all, it's fantastic to be here this evening, and what a kind of wonderful event. So really, really happy to be here. So you're right. You know, when I was 6 years old, my father suddenly announced one morning over breakfast that he wanted to sail around the world. He was going to get a boat. He was going to sail around the world, following Captain Cook. I should say my maiden name is Cook. So there's a little bit of a connection, but we're not actually related. So it was just a kind of a very superficial thing. We were going to set sail on the 200th anniversary of Captain Cook's third voyage. So that was the excuse to try and raise money for this voyage, because we weren't particularly wealthy. So, you know, he had to get some money to go on this voyage. So we did. We set sail when I was 7. And I had kind of mixed feelings about it. I had to leave behind all my friends and my doll's house and, you know, everything I knew in England. But he promised we're going to be back in 3 years. Everything is going to go back to normal. You're going to go back to school. All your friends will be waiting, and it will be great.
It would be great. It would be a nice adventure.
Yes,
with the
exactly.
dolphins.
Exactly.
But it turned out differently. And maybe we can just have the video for our audience, and we just
yes, let's kind of play the video to give people an idea.
We see here the video, and it looks quite nice, but the boat was small. There was no luxury at all, as far as I understood, since you were not a rich family. Can you describe the feeling you had as a girl on that boat?
Yes, so the boat, she's 69 feet long. My father kind of found her mainly built and kind of finished her off. But she's quite small down below, so quite a narrow boat. And, you know, for most of the time that I was on board, I just had one bunk on board. So just kind of one bunk, only one working bathroom, one kind of small living room, which had a little table in it.
And the crew was how many people?
Well, it varied. So when we first set sail, set sail from England, we had 3 crew on board, and we sailed all the way down from England to South America with 3 crew on board. And at that point, my dad, I'm afraid my father had a habit of falling out with the crew. So he fell out with the crew, and then we had 2 different crew to sail across the southern Atlantic Ocean all the way from South America to South Africa. And I should say, I don't know how many people in this room are sailors, but we were sailing the wrong way around the world because...
How come?
Because we were following Captain Cook. And Captain Cook, on his third voyage, sailed the wrong way around the world. And what I mean by that is, normally, if you're going to sail around the world, you would sail around the world somewhere near the equator, because then, frankly, the weather's a lot nicer, the waves are a lot smaller, and the wind is behind you most of the way. If you're going to sail and you go from you go from east to west. If you want to go the other way, if you want to go from west to east, the other way around the world, you've got to go really, really far south because the wind only turns the other direction when you go very far south. But the problem with going really far south is that the waves become huge because there's no land masses down in the southern oceans to kind of break up the waves, and you tend to get terrible storms. So our first voyage, which was from the UK down to South America, was relatively straightforward, and we did see some of the things that you talked about. You know, we saw some whales and dolphins and all of those sorts of things. But then it became much more difficult because we sailed from South America to South Africa with huge storms. And then we set sail from South Africa across one of the most dangerous oceans in the world, which is the southern Indian Ocean.
So although your father knew it was the wrong direction, he did it kind of a interesting behavior, to say so. So you mentioned the Indian Ocean. And there, I think, and I read in the book, something happened. You were shipwrecked, right? Can you tell us the story?
Yeah. So we set sail from South Africa, from Cape Town, and we had 2 crew on board by this point. These are 2 new crew again. In fact, they'd never sailed before. Poor crew, Larry and Herbie. I don't think they ever sailed again, actually, after this trip. This was their one and only sailing trip. I think actually Herbie was Swiss.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You were still in contact? Or?
No. I just remember he was Swiss. I'm no longer in contact with him. I think he ran as far away as possible from the sea afterwards. But you'll see in the book, I think Herbie was Swiss. Anyway, we set sail from Cape Town and almost immediately ran into one of these huge Southern Ocean storms that just built day after day. You know, the wind builds and the waves get bigger and bigger and bigger. And after about a week of this, you're sailing in enormous oceans. And there was a little picture in that video, which was an artist impression of some of these enormous waves, which were, 30, 40 feet high. And what you're doing on a boat when you're in waves that big is you're basically trying to kind of go down the wave perpendicular so that you're kind of exactly going down. Because if you go down on an angle, the boat can be flipped. And then eventually what happened was 3 waves combined together. The wind slightly moved direction, the waves started coming in 2 different directions, they started combining, and my father says, I was down below, my father says he looked behind himself and saw this enormous wave that was like 3 times as high as our main mast, which would have made it about 90 feet high. And this wave broke over the boat, and remember the boat's 69 feet long, so the wave hit us halfway down the boat. So it missed the first kind of 40 feet, landed in the middle of the deck, smashed through the deck, out the side of the hull. And I was down below, and I was trying to help my mum get us some food, because we hadn't actually eaten for several days by this point. Well, little scraps, but not very much, because you can't really eat in the middle of a storm. And I was flung up against the ceiling of the cabin and against the wall of the cabin, broke my nose, fractured my skull, and I was knocked unconscious. So it was a really bad accident. And then of course, what happened after that is every subsequent wave that hit us, all the water started funneling in through that huge hole in the deck.
So, but injured like that, what have you done in the middle of nowhere?
Well, you can't really do very much. I think my parents just put me in a bunk. There's not very much you can do in the middle of an ocean. And we were incredibly lucky because there's almost nothing in the middle of the Southern Ocean. If you go and look on Google Maps and zoom in, you'll find there's almost nothing there between South Africa and Australia. But there is one teeny tiny island called Isle Amsterdam, which actually has a tiny French base on it. And my father guessed, basically, what direction that was. Because I should say, this is before satellite navigation or anything like that. We just had a sextant on board. A sextant is one of those very old-fashioned pieces of navigation equipment where you measure the angle between the sun and the horizon, and that, if you have a good clock, you can tell where you are. Of course, it doesn't work in a storm, so we had no idea where we were. So it's a very good thing if you're on a fairly still boat and the sun is shining. Anyway, so my dad guessed where this island was, and we, kind of set ourselves in that direction with what little sail we could put up. And amazingly, 3 days later, we found this island. And the island sounds very glamorous, but it's basically a volcanic rock in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
But still, you get some healing there. Let me ask you something, because now you describe it, and you smile and you laugh. But when you were on the boat, 7 years old, and then getting older there, what was your daily life like? I mean, privacy there, and education, school stuff. Can you describe maybe how you felt and what you did the whole day?
Well, that was the problem. I mean, so we eventually repaired the boat, and my father was very determined to keep sailing. He'd had this idea of sailing around the world, so he was going to keep sailing around the world. But for a child on a boat, as time goes on, you can't have any friends. It was very limited schooling. My mother had a few worksheets, but very limited schooling. You don't really have anyone to talk to, apart from these crew who would sometimes kind of come and go. And as you say, very limited circumstances on a boat, because there's one bathroom, one tiny table, you've got a bunk, and the bunk, you can't sit up in the bunk. It's kind of the ceiling's too low. It's a very, very kind of cramped condition. And the years kept on going past. I'm starting to get older, and we're still stuck on this boat.
So what about the 3 years plan?
The 3 years plan didn't really happen. So after 4 years, we got to Hawaii. Now, Hawaii, for those of you who know your history of Captain Cook, on Captain Cook's third voyage, he was killed in Hawaii. So that was kind of the end of the voyage.
So
it was
you were happy.
It was supposed to be the end of the voyage. We'd taken 4 years to get there, not 3 because of the shipwreck, but we finally got to Hawaii. And there, something really important happened, which was my father said, now we're going to have a vote. And my father always had this thing where he said, we're only on this boat because we all decided to be on this boat, and this is a kind of collective decision of us all to kind of go around the world. And so he said, we're going to have a vote. And I voted to come home. I mean, by that point, I'm 11, 12 years old, because we're actually in Hawaii for about a year and a half. I still don't have any friends, apart from a couple of kids I met in the boatyard. Still not going to school. I'm basically kind of still stuck on this boat. And worst of all, actually, my relationship, particularly with my mother, was very difficult, and it was getting increasingly difficult. And of course, it's one thing having a very difficult relationship with a parent if you live in a house, but if you're stuck on a boat with them...
And it is... When I was reading the book, I felt quite tightness,
yes.
Just
you can't
reading.
escape, you can't go anywhere. So if you have a very difficult parent and you're stuck and you can't get off the boat because, particularly when you're sailing, you can't get off the boat. So I voted to come home, and my brother voted to come home, and of course my parents both voted to keep sailing. Interesting question why they did. I have kind of various theories about how hard it was for them in the end to come back, because they got themselves trapped on this boat. But anyway, they voted to keep sailing, and then my father announced, actually, this is not a democracy. This is a benevolent dictatorship. And we're going to keep sailing.
Honest, huh?
Yeah. But you see, that changed everything, because from that moment, I knew I was on the boat not of my own choice. Up until then, I kind of somewhat bought into the idea that we were all there together, but then I knew it wasn't my choice. But I still couldn't do anything, because I was still stuck on this boat, going around the world.
So that must have been quite scary, I guess. You felt trapped.
Yes, from that point.
So then from Hawaii, one day you end up in New Zealand, right? This is the big change in the story. Can you explain what happened there?
Well, yes. So we jumped to New Zealand, but by that point, I'd been at sea for 9 years. So by this point, so Hawaii was 4 years, another 5 years go by, basically sailing around and around and around the South Pacific, during which I decide the only way in which I'm ever going to escape from this boat is by trying to teach myself. I've got to give myself an education. Because if I don't give myself an education, I will never get off this boat.
How did you do that? I mean, it was before internet, mailing, all that.
So I managed to register myself with a correspondence school. There was one in Australia, and they used to give you books. So I had this pile of books. So I basically was teaching myself when I could from these books, in between having to work quite a lot on the boat, because by this point, my parents were funding this voyage by taking crew on board. So there was a lot of work to look after the crew, to kind of cook and clean. And I'm afraid the world on this boat was very gendered. So I have a younger brother, he was treated very differently, but I was expected to kind of cook and clean, so I didn't have very much spare time. But anyway, I was teaching myself. And then when I got to 16, and my brother was 15, my parents got concerned about my brother's education, not about mine. As I say, it was a very gendered world, so they weren't worried about mine, but they were worried about his, because when he grew up, he had to support a family, whereas I was the girl, so I didn't have to do that. But I was left to look after him, and he was put in a school in New Zealand, and my parents sailed away, leaving the two of us in New Zealand. So I'm 16, he's 15, and yes, in the book, that's a real turning point, because I'm left on my own, age 16. My parents have gone completely. They don't come back for 9 months. New Zealand authorities tried to deport me a couple of times because I'm not supposed to be in New Zealand. But somehow, I do get very depressed for a while, but somehow I managed to kind of turn it around in that year, and I eventually write to every university I've ever heard of in the world and basically beg them to let me in.
That's how you got to Oxford, right? I mean,
yes.
You did not really have that huge education.
No.
And they took you in. It was because of your story, you think?
Well, I wrote to them, and they said, write us a couple of essays. So I wrote them a couple of very crazy essays. And then they said, will you sit an exam? And I said, I can't sit an exam. How can I sit an exam? I was basically living in a hut in New Zealand. How can I sit an exam? I'm sitting in a hut in New Zealand, and I haven't really been to school. And I knew everyone in England, by the way, I did 3 subjects. I was trying to do an Australian course, and anyway, I wasn't really sitting proper exams. It was all kind of a mess. So they said, okay, well, if you can get to England, we will interview you. And so I went and I picked kiwi fruit, which is one of the kind of national fruit of New Zealand. By the way, it's a horrible thing to pick. If you ever should feel inclined to go and pick kiwi fruit, please don't. It's really horrible. Anyway, but I got enough money for a plane ticket, a one-way ticket, got on a plane and came back. And amazingly, they let me in, which was completely turned my life around, because otherwise I don't quite know where I would have ended up.
So you went to Oxford with not having this education like other students, not having the experience, small talk, just let's say a normal life. How did you adapt?
Well, you see, I thought when I got into Oxford that it was going to be a nightmare academically, because I was really worried about all the things I didn't know, which I was very conscious of. So, for example, I'd never learnt my times tables. I didn't know how to spell. I wanted to study biology, but I'd never studied chemistry. They won't let you study chemistry on a boat, by the way, because they're worried, the correspondence school was worried I might blow myself up. So I wasn't allowed to study chemistry. So I was very worried about the academics. And then I thought, socially, this is going to be fantastic. Finally, after 10 years, it was 10 years by then, after 10 years, I'm finally going to be around people my own age. I'm going to have parties. It's going to be great. And actually, the opposite was the truth.
Yeah, you didn't know the code, right?
Well, yes, exactly. So actually, academically, it was okay, because the one thing I'd learned how to do on that boat was how to teach myself. And when I suddenly had access to libraries and lectures, actually that was the one thing I knew how to do, was how to teach myself. But socially it was very difficult, because I didn't know how to do small talk, as you said. We didn't have anything in common. What do you say to somebody? I hadn't seen any of the same television programs or listened to the same music. We had nothing in common. So it took quite a long time, the best part of a year, I think, before I really started to kind of learn how to fit in with people. So that was very difficult as well.
But it's really amazing what you did. I mean, you finished your degree at Oxford, then a PhD at Cambridge. You went on to work in the public sector at the UK Treasury, McKinsey, the management consultancy, and then Exor, the group that is the largest shareholder of many companies, including Ferrari, Stellantis, and The Economist. I mean, this is quite an incredible way, and I'm fascinated about what you have done. I'm not the only one, I'm sure. So, what did you learn besides teaching yourself on that boat that still benefits you in your top positions in business?
Well, the ability to teach myself is still a kind of very useful skill. If I really want to learn something, I know how to teach myself. You know, I have that kind of ability to just say, okay.
What was the last thing you learned?
Oh, I decided to do a course in cybersecurity because on one of the boards that I chair, people kept on saying to me, you have to put a board member on your board who knows about cybersecurity.
You said, here I am.
Well, and I thought, because one of our principles as Exor is that we quite like small boards. You know, we like our boards to be, so one of the boards I chair is the board of Case New Holland, which is, it makes agricultural machinery. So it's number 2 after John Deere. So you have John Deere and then Case New Holland. And it's a very small board. It's only got 9 people on it. So I don't really want one of those seats to be occupied by somebody who's just going to tell me about cybersecurity. But I kept on getting told that you had to get someone with cybersecurity. So I thought, well, this really can't be that hard. So I went and did a course in cybersecurity, which you can do. You can do that online now. It's fantastic. I mean, Google, by the way, has a very good course in cybersecurity. And it was quite fun. So that ability to say, okay, I'm going to go and learn something is very interesting. And now I can ask lots of annoying questions in audit committees. You know, I know all about the kind of questions to ask on cybersecurity.
They like you very much, huh?
Yeah, they like me very much. Anyway, so that is one key skill, which I think really is useful because the world changes very quickly, as we all know. So having that ability to kind of say, okay, there's some skill I don't have, which I'm now going to go and find. And it's so much easier to do that nowadays because it is all available if you want to do it. I think the other really big, there were loads of disadvantages, by the way. I do not recommend this. You know, if any of you are thinking of putting your kids on a boat and going around the world, please don't do it. It's not a good idea. But if you escape from it, one of the things that you do get is this word that is very overused, which is resilience. And for me, it's very simple, actually. When I found myself in a very difficult position, so if I go back to this tractor, agricultural machinery company, during the COVID period, I needed to step in not just as chair, but I was CEO for the COVID period. And it's a pretty big company. Well, now it's a bit smaller because we've taken Iveco out. But it was about 65,000 people, and we had plants all over the world. We had plants in America and South America and kind of all over Europe and India and China and so on. So it was very stressful because you're closing every plant everywhere. Everybody's rules are different in the COVID period. And as soon as I started to feel myself panicking, I would, and it sounds really silly, but I would literally think back to being a little girl stood on a boat in the middle of the Indian Ocean where I had no control over anything and everything was being kind of done to me. And then I would think, well, this is very different. This is fine. You know, I have a degree of control. You compare. And the comparison makes you put things in proportion. And when you put things in proportion, that calms you down. And when you calm yourself down, you can listen to people.
Is this something you teach your kids? Because, as you said, you don't want to send them on a boat to get these massive resilience skills. So can you teach it? Can we learn that?
So I think you can teach it to some extent. So, you know, from the point of view of a parent, it comes back to that really interesting debate about whether or not you protect your children from everything or whether you allow them to kind of have some more difficult experiences. And I really believe that if you protect them from everything, they don't build any of that resilience. Because as soon as they hit something that's a little bit difficult, they're going to crumble because they have no idea how to deal with it. So as a parent, and I have 3 kids who are all in their kind of early 20s now, as a parent, I think, and it's very hard to do, by the way, for normal parents, not for my parents, but for normal parents, it's very hard to do. You've got to allow your children sometimes to make mistakes and get themselves in a little bit of trouble or have to figure something out by themselves so that they start to kind of get things into proportion. proportion. This is not a big issue. I've solved an issue like this before. And I think the same is at work as well. If you have a team of people, you don't want to fix every problem for them. You don't want to step in and, do every presentation for them. Figure out things where they can make a mistake and it can go wrong, and then realize actually the world didn't end. You can pick yourself up and it's absolutely fine. I do also sometimes talk to my teams, less to my kids, because my kids are really bored of the boat story, so I can't talk to my kids. But with my teams, I do try to encourage them when something happens to do that exercise of putting something in proportion. Okay, so somebody's dented my car, or I've fallen out with somebody at work. It has to be something kind of meaningful. Well, just stop a moment. Okay, is this something you're still going to be worrying about in 6 months? You're still going to be worrying about it in a year? When you think about the worst thing that could happen to you, where is this scaled against that? And if you can teach people to kind of do that, they become much calmer when they hit problems. And for me, that's what resilience is. Resilience is the ability to see things in proportion, and therefore not to overreact to the smaller things.
Thank you so much. You are a pro in resilience. We take that tips. Thank you so much. Let me make a big step and go to Europe, because you also comment on Europe. If you observe Europe, how resilient is Europe showing up facing all those crises?
So I guess there's good news and bad news. So the good news is, as Europe, we've withstood a huge amount. If we kind of think back through history, or even if we think back to the last decade, what we've been through, the financial crisis, COVID, what happened after COVID, the war in Ukraine, many, many things, and we have somehow found a way through. And Europe is still there, and Europe is still doing pretty well. So that's the good news. The good news is we know we can do it, and we have done it. The bad news is the world has got, I think, a lot tougher. The fact that the world is now moving into much more clearly demarked factions, as we can all see. The trade barriers are going up. I think we're living in a much more unstable world than we were living in before. Europe needs to, first of all, come closer together. This is a world where we need friends. Everybody needs friends. It's very hard, I think, to be in this world and not have friends. I think maybe in the past that was possible, but now I think countries need friends. And I think the other thing Europe needs to do is it needs to get faster at doing things. So Europe moves very slowly. It's relatively bureaucratic. Things take a long time.
Yes. Nice said.
And unfortunately, the world is moving very quickly. It's very hard. If Europe is going to take months or years to make a decision to invest on, so for example, one of our companies is Stellantis, which makes cars, as people probably know. In order for the auto industry to move to producing successfully electric cars, electric vehicles, you need an infrastructure. Well, we've been talking about building an infrastructure in Europe for years, and we're still only in the foothills of being able to do it.
Speed is a topic.
We need to be able to move more quickly, and that requires the leaders that we have, who I think they know where we're going, but they've got to move more quickly.
Yeah. So you have the right captains on board.
So I'm less worried about the captains, because I think what we need to do is actually relatively clear. What I'm worried about is whether or not we can get the infrastructure that we all operate in, so the infrastructure of the European Union and the European Commission, and how the UK operates, which is going to sit slightly outside of that, and how Switzerland operates, because you're slightly outside of it as well. How are we going to make that all work so that we can take decisions more quickly? Because we know there's a lot that we have to do. We have to become more productive. We have to invest in things like technology. Otherwise, China and the US are going to run away before we can have a chance of catching up with them. So we have to get faster. And that means that we need to start breaking down some of these bureaucratic barriers which slow us down.
I think you would be a very good politician. That's not so hard, to learn, maybe like cybersecurity.
Yes,
would that be something for you?
Way.
You were working
in
the public...
There must be an online course somewhere.
It's an online course, for sure. So what's your next project?
Well, I'm writing another book. So this book, kind of Wave Walker, came out, and it's done incredibly well, actually. It's due to become a mini-series, which is quite exciting.
Oh,
very
so
exciting.
when?
Well, we don't know when, but we have an actor, a British actor called James Norton, and a writer, a guy called Jack Thorne, who wrote. Some of you may have seen it. It was a series on Netflix called Adolescence.
Yeah,
very good.
So a very dark thing, huh?
It was very dark.
Yeah, okay.
But he's very good. He's very good. Anyway, so I'm writing another book because since Wave Walker came out, about more than 100 people have contacted me with crazy stories about their childhoods. So my side thing is writing books. I've kind of discovered that I love writing books. Wave Walker was actually my fourth book, because I wrote one about my late husband. Mm-hmm. That was What Does Jeremy Think? So I'm now starting to write that. But I write very slowly because it's not my main job.
You brought us some copies, right? And you signed them. I saw you upstairs with a bunch of
big
books.
pile of copies.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're gonna put them close to the exit.
Yes.
And whenever you feel like, just go and pick a book. And I really can recommend it. Although it's sometimes it's really tough to read, as I mentioned before.
Yes, you need a stiff drink before the chapter.
What would you recommend? So like
something
rum.
very strong.
Something
maybe rum. Before the chapter that's called The Wave, it's a bit of a clue, I would drink something relatively strong.
Okay.
But I do hope that lots of people here will get the chance to read
Is this also a tip for resilience? Drink.
A little bit, and then...
Are you still sailing, by the way?
So before I wrote the book, I went back and got something called a yacht master qualification, because I kind of felt the need to do a proper qualification, but I don't sail very much anymore. And my children know enough about my childhood not really to want to get on a boat.
Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Suzanne. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you
very much.
Okay.
Also,